On a cold December afternoon in 1872, the crew of the British brigantine des Gretias spotted something unusual on the horizon. A merchant ship, sailing erratically through the choppy waters of the Atlantic Ocean, appeared to be adrift. As they drew closer, the sailors noticed something deeply unsettling. No one was manning the helm, no crew members walked the deck. The ship, they would soon discover, was completely abandoned. This vessel was the Mary Celeste, and her discovery would become one of the most enduring maritime mysteries in history. What the boarding party found, or rather what they didn't find, would puzzle investigators, spark wild theories and capture imaginations for over a century and a half. The Mary Celeste wasn't just abandoned, she was a floating enigma. Her cargo was intact, the crew's personal belongings remained undisturbed, and there were no signs of violence or struggle. Yet somehow 10 people, including the ship's experienced captain, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter and 7 crew members, had vanished without a trace into the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. This is not a tale of pirates or sea monsters, though many have tried to paint it as such. This is a real mystery, documented in maritime records, court proceedings and countless investigations. It's a story that reminds us that even in our modern age of satellites and constant communication, the sea still holds secrets that may never be revealed. Tonight we delve into the strange case of the Mary Celeste. We'll examine the evidence, explore the theories, and try to understand what could have happened on that merchant brigantine to make 10 people abandon a seaworthy vessel in the middle of the ocean. We'll separate fact from fiction, look at what the investigators found, and consider possibilities that range from the mundane to the extraordinary. But I warn you now, there are no easy answers here. The Mary Celeste guards her secrets well, and despite decades of investigation and speculation, the truth of what happened aboard that ship remains locked away, perhaps forever lost to the depths of history and the sea. The date was December 5, 1872. The Des Gracias, under the command of Captain David Morehouse, was making steady progress across the Atlantic, bound for Gibraltar from New York. The weather had been rough but manageable, typical for the North Atlantic in early winter. First Mate Oliver Deveau was on watch when he spotted the ship that would change maritime history. At approximately 1 p.m., between the Azores and the coast of Portugal, Deveau noticed a brigantine about 6 miles distant. Something about her movement caught his attention. She was sailing erratically, her course uncertain, as if no one was at the helm. Through his telescope, Deveau could see that some of her sails were furled, others were torn, and she appeared to be sailing on a starboard tack with no one visible on deck. Captain Morehouse was summoned immediately. As an experienced seaman, he recognized something was seriously wrong. Ships didn't sail themselves across the Atlantic. After observing the vessel for nearly 2 hours and seeing no response to their signals, Morehouse ordered a boarding party to investigate. Deveau led the boarding party, accompanied by seamen John Wright and John Johnson. What they found as they climbed aboard would become the stuff of legend. The ship was indeed the Mary Celeste, a name Morehouse recognized. In a strange twist of fate, he personally knew the ship's captain, Benjamin Briggs. They had dined together in New York just weeks before both ships set sail. The boarding party's investigation was thorough and systematic. Deveau, an experienced seaman, knew what to look for. The ship's hull was sound, with no damage that would necessitate abandonment. She had taken on some water about 3.5 feet in the hold, but nothing that couldn't be managed with the ship's pump. The pumps themselves were operational, though one was disassembled on deck apparently for maintenance. Moving through the vessel, the men found a scene that defied explanation. In the captain's cabin, everything appeared normal. Captain Briggs' clothes hung in the wardrobe. His wife Sarah's sewing machine sat ready for use, with a piece of fabric still positioned under the needle. Their daughter Sophia's toys were neatly arranged. The ship's log was on the captain's desk. The last entry dated November 25, 10 days before the discovery. The crew's quarters told a similar story. Personal effects remained in place. Tobacco pipes lay where they had been set down. Oilskin coats hung on their peg. The galley showed evidence of meal preparation, though reports of still warm food or steaming cups of coffee are later embellishments. The food stores were adequate, and the water barrels contained drinkable water. Most puzzling of all was what was missing. The ship's chronometer and sextant were gone, as was the ship's register and other navigation papers. The compass was damaged, its housing broken. Most significantly, the ship's lifeboat, a small yawl that had been secured on deck, was missing. A length of rope, possibly used to lower the boat, hung over the side, its end frayed and trailing in the water. Deveau would later testify at the salvage hearing. The whole ship was a wet mess. Everything was soaked through, but there was no sign of violence. No blood. No disorder beyond what the weather would cause on an unmanned vessel. The cargo hold revealed 701 barrels of denatured alcohol, bound for Genoa. 9 of the barrels were empty, though it was unclear whether they had been empty when loaded or had leaked during the voyage. The alcohol was industrial grade, poisonous to drink, and of a type that gave off no dangerous fumes. After 3 hours of investigation, Deveau returned to the Dei Gratia with his report. Captain Morehouse faced a difficult decision. Maritime law entitled him to claim the Mary Celeste as salvage, but doing so would require splitting his already small crew to sail both vessels to port. After much deliberation, he decided the potential reward was worth the risk. Deveau and 2 crew members returned to the Mary Celeste with the task of sailing her to Gibraltar. It would take them 8 days to complete the journey, during which they would pump out the water, repair what damage they could, and try to understand what had happened. Despite thorough searches, they found no hidden clues, no messages, no indication of why 10 people would abandon a seaworthy vessel. The Dei Gratia and Mary Celeste arrived in Gibraltar on December 3. What should have been a straightforward salvage claim quickly became something far more complex. The Attorney General of Gibraltar, Frederick Solly Flood, was immediately suspicious. Ships didn't simply get abandoned without reason. In his mind, there had to be foul play, piracy, mutiny, or worse. What followed was an extensive investigation that would raise more questions than answers. The mystery of the Mary Celeste had only just begun. To understand the magnitude of this mystery, we must first know who vanished that day on the Atlantic. These weren't nameless sailors lost to history. They were real people with families, dreams, and futures that were suddenly cut short without explanation. Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, 37 years old, was the master of the Mary Celeste. Born into a seafaring family in Massachusetts, Briggs was known as a competent and cautious captain. He was deeply religious, a teetotaler who read the Bible daily, and held Sunday services aboard ship. His reputation was sterling, no hint of recklessness or poor judgment. He had invested his life savings in the Mary Celeste, owning a third share of the vessel. This was not a man who would abandon ship without extraordinary cause. Traveling with him were his wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, 31, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda. Sarah was an accomplished woman who often accompanied her husband on voyages. Her letters home, found among the family's papers, paint a picture of an intelligent, devoted wife and mother. Just before departure, she had written to her mother-in-law, "Benjamin thinks we shall have a good voyage. The mate is a very nice man, and we have a good crew." The crew consisted of 7 men, each with their own story. First mate Albert Richardson, 28, was sailing on his first voyage as an officer. Like Briggs, he came from a seafaring family and was known to be reliable and competent. He had recently married and was looking forward to returning home to his new wife. Second mate Andrew Gilling, 25, was Danish-born but had become an American citizen. Described as quiet and hard-working, he had served on several vessels without incident. The cook and steward was Edward Head, 23, newly married like Richardson. His wife would later spend years hoping for his return, refusing to believe he was dead. The 4 seamen were Germans, brothers Volkert and Bose Lorenzen, Arian Harbins, and Gottlieb Gudsch. All were experienced sailors who had served on American vessels before. They were known to be competent seamen, familiar with Atlantic crossings. This was not a crew of misfits or troublemakers. Maritime records and testimonies from those who knew them paint a picture of professional sailors and a stable family. There were no known conflicts among them, no history of violence or insubordination. The voyage began ordinarily enough. The Mary Celeste departed New York on November 7, 1872, bound for Genoa, Italy, with her cargo of alcohol. The weather was fair, and spirits seemed high. Sarah Briggs' last letter, posted just before departure, mentioned looking forward to the voyage and hoping for good weather. For the first weeks, everything appeared normal. The ship's log, recovered from the captain's cabin, showed routine entries, course corrections, weather observations, sail adjustments, all the mundane details of ocean travel. The entries were in Captain Briggs' neat handwriting, methodical and precise as always. The last log entry was dated November 25, placing the ship near Santa Maria Island in the Azores. The entry was routine. At 8 Eastern Point bore SSW 6 miles distant. No hint of trouble, no mention of concerns. After that, silence. What happened in the 10 days between that final log entry and the discovery by the Dei Gratia? The condition of the ship provides some clues, but they only deepen the mystery. The ship had clearly encountered rough weather. Sails were torn, Rigging was damaged, and water had entered the hold, but this was nothing unusual for an Atlantic crossing in November. Ships regularly weathered far worse storms without being abandoned. The Mary Celeste was still seaworthy when found. DeVoe and his skeleton crew proved that by sailing her to Gibraltar, there were no signs of violence, no blood, no evidence of struggle, no weapons drawn. The cargo was largely intact, ruling out piracy. Pirates would have taken the valuable cargo, not left it sitting in the hold. The crew's personal belongings remained, including money found in the captain's cabin. What pirate would leave money behind? The missing lifeboat suggests the crew left voluntarily, and why so hastily that they left behind warm clothes, personal effects and navigation equipment beyond the basic sextant and chronometer. Perhaps most puzzling was the condition in which they left the ship. Experienced sailors don't abandon ship without securing it first, yet hatches were found open, allowing water to enter. The binnacle was damaged, its compass destroyed. Was this deliberate sabotage, storm damage, or something else entirely? Theories would emerge, some plausible, others fantastic, but one fact remained constant. 10 people vanished from a seaworthy ship in the middle of the ocean, leaving behind everything but the clothes on their backs and a few navigation instruments. They were never seen again. No bodies were ever recovered. No lifeboat was ever found. No messages in bottles ever washed ashore. The Atlantic had swallowed them completely, leaving only questions in their wake. Theories and speculations. In the absence of facts, human nature abhors a vacuum. The mystery of the Mary Celeste has spawned theories ranging from the mundane to the fantastic, each attempting to explain the inexplicable. Let us examine these theories with the cold eye of investigation, weighing evidence against speculation. The piracy theory. From the moment the Mary Celeste arrived in Gibraltar, Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General, suspected foul play. The Queen's Proctor of the Vice Admiralty Court, Solly Flood was a suspicious man by nature and profession. He immediately ordered a thorough investigation. Convinced that piracy or mutiny had befallen the vessel, his inspectors searched for evidence of violence. They examined every surface for bloodstains. Using the best forensic techniques available they found what appeared to be blood on the captain's sword and on the ship's rail. Chemical tests of the era seemed to confirm it was blood. Modern analysis of similar stains on ships of the period suggests these were more likely rust stains or wine residue, but Solly Flood had his evidence. The piracy theory had several variants. Perhaps pirates had attacked, killed the crew and thrown their bodies overboard. But this theory collapsed under scrutiny. Pirates seek profit. Why leave behind valuable cargo and personal money? Why take the ship's papers but leave everything else? And how could pirates dispose of 10 bodies so efficiently that no trace remained? Solly Flood even suspected the Dei Gratia crew of foul play. The salvage award would be substantial. Perhaps Morehouse and his men had encountered the Mary Celeste, killed her crew and concocted the abandonment story. But this theory too had fatal flaws. Morehouse and Briggs were friends who had dined together before departure. The Dei Gratia had left port 8 days after the Mary Celeste. How could she have caught up, committed murder and then discovered the abandoned ship? The logistics made no sense. The mutiny theory. Perhaps the crew had mutinied, killing Captain Briggs and his family before escaping in the lifeboat. Mutinies weren't unknown in the merchant marine, particularly when crews were mixed nationality or when captains were harsh disciplinarians. But Benjamin Briggs was known as a fair captain, and there was no history of conflict with this crew. The Germans were experienced sailors with good records. Would they mutiny over a routine Atlantic crossing? And if they had, why not sail the ship to a port where they could disappear? Why abandon her at sea, ensuring their own likely death in a small boat on the winter Atlantic? The investigators found no evidence of struggle in the crew quarters, no weapons missing from the ship's armory, no defensive wounds on any surface that might indicate a fight. If mutiny had occurred, it was the cleanest, most efficient mutiny in maritime history. Natural disaster theories. More plausible were theories involving natural phenomena. The Atlantic Ocean in winter could produce sudden, violent weather. Perhaps a waterspout, a tornado at sea had threatened the ship. These could appear suddenly and be terrifying to behold. Faced with such a threat, even experienced sailors might panic and abandon ship. Sea quakes were another possibility. Underwater earthquakes could produce shock waves that would violently shake a ship without causing visible damage. To those aboard, it might feel as if the vessel was breaking apart. In panic, they might lower the lifeboat, only to watch their ship sail away still intact, leaving them to perish in the ocean. The alcohol cargo led to another theory. Perhaps the barrels had leaked, creating dangerous fumes in the hold. Denatured alcohol could produce vapor that, while not poisonous in open air, might accumulate below decks. If the crew opened the hold and encountered a cloud of fumes, they might have feared an explosion. In panic, they could have abandoned ship temporarily, planning to trail behind in the lifeboat until the danger passed. This theory gained support from the 9 empty barrels found in the hold. Had they leaked? Had their contents evaporated? The boarding party reported no strong alcohol smell, but 10 days of open hatches could have cleared any fume. The Mary Celeste's fatal flaw. Some investigators focused on the ship herself. The Mary Celeste had undergone extensive repairs and modifications. Her hull had been lengthened, her capacity increased. Perhaps these modifications had created a structural weakness. If the crew heard ominous creaking or saw the hull flexing in heavy seas, they might have believed the ship was about to break apart. The disassembled pump on deck suggested they had been dealing with water in the hull. If water was entering faster than they could pump, and they believed the ship was sinking, abandonment would be logical. But the Dei Gratia crew found her still afloat with manageable water levels. Had the crew miscalculated the danger? Supernatural theories. Inevitably, the supernatural crept into explanations. The Bermuda Triangle wouldn't be named for another century, but the idea of cursed waters where ships vanished was already part of maritime lore. Some suggested the crew had been taken by sea monsters, aliens, or supernatural forces. These theories, while captivating, offered no evidence. They filled the void of explanation with fantasy, turning a real tragedy into fodder for sensationalist newspapers and pulp fiction. Yet they persisted, perhaps because the rational theories all had flaws, leaving room for the irrational to flourish. The insurance fraud theory. A more cynical theory suggested insurance fraud. Perhaps Briggs and the crew had conspired to abandon the ship, claim insurance money, and start new lives. But this theory collapsed under investigation. Briggs had invested his life savings in the ship. Abandoning her would ruin him, not enrich. His share of the cargo was worth far less than his investment. And would a man involve his wife and 2-year-old daughter in such a dangerous scheme? Furthermore, no insurance claims were filed by the crew members' families for years, hoping against hope for their return. If this was fraud, it was peculiarly executed, with no one benefiting from it. Ergot poisoning. One of the more unusual theories involved ergot poisoning. Ergot, a fungus that grows on rye and other grains, can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and madness. Perhaps contaminated food had driven the crew to madness, causing them to leap into the sea or sail away in the lifeboat under delusions. But the investigation found no contaminated food stores. The crew had been eating from these supplies for weeks without incident. And ergot poisoning typically affects individuals differently. The odds of all 10 people simultaneously succumbing to delusions that led them to abandon ship were astronomically small. Each theory examined closely revealed flaws. The evidence could support multiple explanations but proved none. The Mary Celeste had become a Rorschach test. Each investigator saw in her abandonment what they expected to see, shaped by their own experiences and bias. Strange details found on board. Beyond the broad strokes of the mystery lay peculiar details that defied easy explanation. These oddities, documented by the boarding party and subsequent investigators, added layers of complexity to an already baffling case. The ship's clock had stopped at 8 hours, though whether AM or PM was unclear. Was this significant? Had it stopped during whatever event caused the abandonment, marking the precise time of the tragedy? Or had it simply wound down during the 10 days of abandonment, its stopping time meaning? In the captain's cabin, investigators found Captain Briggs' bed unmade but dry, despite water damage throughout much of the ship. His wife's bed was neatly made. Their daughter's bed showed signs of recent use. These domestic details painted a picture of normalcy interrupt. The morning routine, perhaps Benjamin rising early for his watch while Sarah and Sophia slept, frozen in time. The galley revealed its own mysteries. The stove was cold, its fire long extinguished. Cooking implements were secured in their proper place. There was no evidence of meal preparation underway when the ship was abandoned. Yet the food stores were ample and properly stowed. Whatever happened hadn't occurred during mealtime. More puzzling was the state of the crew's possession. Sailors' sea chests remained in the forecastle, containing not just spare clothes but personal treasures, letters from home, small mementos, tobacco, and even some money. Sailors guarded these possessions jealous. To leave them behind suggested either extreme haste or the belief they would return. The ship's medicine chest was intact, and showed no signs of recent use. If illness had struck the crew, surely someone would have sought remedy. The absence of medical supplies usage argued against theories of poisoning or disease. One of the strangest details involved the ship's compass. The binnacle, the housing for the ship's compass, was found damaged, shifted from its mount. The compass itself was destroyed. This damage seemed deliberate rather than accidental. But why would anyone destroy the compass while leaving other navigation equipment functional? And if it was destroyed before abandonment, how did they navigate afterward? Investigators also puzzled over some sails were furled, others set, and some torn by weather. This mixed state suggested either interrupted sail handling, or damage accumulated over days of unmanned drifting. But which was it? The pattern made no nautical sense. The cargo hold presented its own enigma. Of 1,701 barrels of alcohol, 9 were empty. These empty barrels were made of red oak, while the full ones were white oak. Had the red oak been more porous, allowing evaporation, or had these barrels been empty from the start? A detail lost in loading record. More curious was a sword found beneath the captain's bed. It showed what appeared to be blood stains, according to Solly Flood's analysis, but the sword was rusty and old, apparently a decorative piece rather than a weapon. Later analysis suggested the stains were rust, not blood. Still, why was it under the bed rather than mounted on the wall where such decorative pieces usually hung? The ship's pumps told a contradictory story. One pump was disassembled on deck, its parts laid out as if for repair or cleaning. This suggested mechanical problem. Yet the other pump was functional, and the water in the hold was manageable. Had they overestimated the danger, or had the disassembled pump been crucial for some reason no longer apparent? Perhaps most telling was what wasn't found. There were no farewell notes, no messages explaining their departure. In an era when sailors often left final messages when facing death, this absence spoke volumes. Either they hadn't had time, hadn't thought they were dying, or had been prevented from writing. The ship's cat was missing. Maritime superstition held that cats would never abandon a seaworthy ship. Had the cat sensed danger and fled, or had it simply been taken by the departing crew? This detail, trivial as it might seem, bothered investigators familiar with shipboard tradition. Small amounts of water were found in unexpected places, in the captain's cabin, in sealed areas that should have remained dry. This suggested the ship had experienced severe rolling, or had been partially submerged at some point. But during the storm that caused abandonment, or during the 10 days of drifting, these details, meticulously documented, created a pointillistic portrait of abandonment. Each fact was clear in isolation but formed no coherent picture when assembled. Like pieces from different puzzles mixed together, they suggested patterns that dissolved upon closer inspection. The Mary Celeste, it seemed, was touched by misfortune long before her famous abandonment. Her history read like a catalogue of maritime mishaps, leading some to wonder if she was indeed cursed, or simply a vessel that attracted bad luck, like a magnet attracts iron. She wasn't born as Mary Celeste. The ship was launched in 1861 from the shipyard of Joshua Dewis in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, under the name Amazon. Even her birth was marked by tragedy. During her construction, a fire broke out in the shipyard. Though the damage was contained, locals muttered about bad omens. Shipbuilders were notoriously superstitious, and a fire during construction was considered a dark portent. Her first captain, Robert McClellan, took command of the Amazon for her maiden voyage. He fell ill with pneumonia just days into the journey and died at sea. The ship returned to port bearing his body, hardly an auspicious beginning. Maritime tradition held that a ship that killed her first captain was marked by fate. John Nutting Parker took over as captain, but his tenure was equally star-crossed. During a voyage to England, the Amazon struck fishing equipment off the coast of Maine, requiring expensive repairs. Parker himself was dismissed after a collision in the English Channel that damaged the ship's hull. 2 captains, 2 disasters. The pattern was establishing itself. The third captain, William Thompson, lasted barely 2 years before the Amazon ran aground on Cape Breton Island during a storm. Though salvaged, she required extensive repairs. The damage was so severe that her owners sold her for a fraction of her original cost. She had become a financial albatross, beautiful, but dangerous. By 1868, the ship had passed through several more hands, each owner hoping to break her streak of bad luck. She was purchased by Richard Haynes of New York, who decided radical changes were needed. The ship was extensively rebuilt, Her length increased. Her rigging altered. Her capacity expanded. Even her name was changed. Amazon became Mary Celeste, though maritime records show this was accidentally registered as Mary Celeste before being corrected. The name change was supposed to break the curse. Sailors believed changing a ship's name could confuse the evil spirits that plagued her. But the Mary Celeste's misfortunes continued. In 1869, she was seized by creditors when her owner faced bankruptcy. Captain Rufus Fowler took command, but lasted only one voyage before quitting, claiming the ship was unlucky. Enter Benjamin Briggs in 1872. Unlike previous captains, Briggs was not deterred by the ship's reputation. A deeply religious man, he put no stock in superstitions about curses. He saw a well-built vessel, available at a good price due to her troubled history. Along with a small consortium of investors, he purchased a share in the Mary Celeste, becoming both part owner and captain. Briggs supervised repairs and improvements to the ship. He had her thoroughly overhauled, checking every beam and plank. The previous damage was repaired, the rigging renewed, the hull carefully inspected. By all accounts, the Mary Celeste was in excellent condition when she left New York in November. Briggs wrote to his mother that he had never seen a vessel so well fitted out. Yet those who knew the ship's history watched her departure with knowing looks. 7 captains in 11 years, fires, collisions, groundings, financial ruin following in her wake. Now she was heading into the Atlantic late in the season with the captain's family aboard. What could go wrong? The sailors in New York's taverns had their own theories about the Mary Celeste. Some claimed she was built from cursed wood trees that had grown in a graveyard or been used for gallows. Others said she was haunted by Captain McClellan's ghost forever trying to complete his interrupted maiden voyage. These were tavern tales, dismissed by rational men like Briggs. But after the abandonment, such stories took on new significance. There was one particularly odd incident from her past that investigators found noteworthy. In 1867, while still named Amazon, she had been boarded by customs officials, who found her cargo manifest didn't match her actual cargo. Nothing sinister, just bureaucratic errors, but it had resulted in hefty fines. The incident established that the ship had been used, however, inadvertently for cargo irregularities. Could this have any connection to her later abandonment? It seemed unlikely, but investigators grasped at any straw. The ship's construction itself came under scrutiny. Built during the American Civil War when materials were scarce, and shipbuilders rushed to meet demand, had corners been cut? Were there hidden structural flaws that manifested only under certain conditions? The extensive rebuilding suggested previous owners had found problems, but had they found them all? Some maritime historians pointed to the ship's repeated groundings and collisions. Each incident, even when repaired, could leave hidden weaknesses in the hull. Metal fatigue wasn't understood in 1872, but ships that had suffered repeated trauma could develop problems that appeared suddenly under stress. Had the Mary Celeste's hull finally given way, opening seams that terrified the crew into abandonment? The insurance records revealed another curious pattern. The Mary Celeste had been consistently underinsured throughout her career. Owners seemed reluctant to pay full premiums, as if they expected her to be a total loss eventually. Briggs himself had insured his share for less than its value. Did he too, despite his rationalism, harbor doubts about the ship's seaworthiness? By 1872, the Mary Celeste had sailed for 11 years under 2 names, 7 captains, and through multiple disasters. She had been burned, grounded, collided, seized, rebuilt, and renamed. If ships could bear scars, she was covered in. And now she had added the greatest mystery of all to her troubled legacy: the complete disappearance of all souls aboard. The Gibraltar investigation began immediately upon the Mary Celeste's arrival on December 13. Frederick Solly Flood, Attorney General and Admiralty Proctor, took personal charge of the case. A man of rigid thinking and deep suspicions, Solly Flood was convinced from the start that he was dealing with a crime, not an accident. His first act was to impound both vessels and arrest the De Gratia crew. In his mind, the salvage claim was too convenient, the story too strange. How had a ship sailed unmanned for 10 days without sinking? Why had experienced sailors abandoned a seaworthy vessel? The whole affair reeked of conspiracy. Solly Flood ordered Captain John Austin of Her Majesty's Survey Service to examine the Mary Celeste. Austin's report was thorough, but found little to support theories of violence. The bloodstains, Solly Flood had hoped would crack the case proved inconclusive. The sword found under the captain's bed showed marks that might be blood or might be rust. Chemical analysis of the era couldn't determine which definitively. The court proceedings lasted 3 months. Witness after witness testified, but their accounts only deepened the mystery. Oliver DeVoe of the De Gratia gave precise, seaman-like testimony about the Mary Celeste's condition. His story never wavered, even under Solly Flood's aggressive questioning. The ship had been abandoned but seaworthy. There were no signs of violence. The cargo was intact. Solly Flood hired additional investigators. They discovered the 9 empty barrels in the hold, and immediately suspected crew members had drunk the alcohol and gone mad. But the alcohol was denatured industrial grade, poisonous to drink. Analysis showed no signs it had been consumed. The investigator then proposed explosion fears. Perhaps alcohol vapors had accumulated, creating danger of explosion. But why abandon ship for a theoretical danger, and why not return when no explosion occurred? The theory explained the abandonment but not the failure to return. American consul Horatio Sprague intervened, protesting the treatment of American sailors and the delays in resolving the case. He pointed out that no evidence of crime had been found despite exhaustive investigation. The De Gratia crew had rescued an abandoned vessel according to maritime law. Where was the crime in that? Solly Flood's final report, submitted in March 1873, was a masterpiece of innuendo without evidence. He suggested but couldn't prove that the crews had conspired. He hinted, but couldn't demonstrate that violence had occurred. He implied, but couldn't establish that the Mary Celeste crew had been murdered. His report convinced no one but himself. The court ultimately awarded salvage to the De Gratia crew, but only 1,700 tars, far less than the standard rate for such a recovery. The low award reflected lingering suspicions, even though no evidence supported them. The De Gratia crew, vindicated but poorly compensated, sailed away under a cloud of suspicion that would follow them for years. The official investigation had failed spectacularly. 3 months of inquiry, dozens of witnesses, multiple expert examinations, and no answers. The British authorities had treated the case as a crime and looked for criminals. Finding none, they had no alternative theories to pursue. The American investigation was equally fruitless. The U.S. State Department collected depositions from family members of the missing crew. Mary Briggs's mother testified about her son's character and competence. Sarah Briggs's mother provided letters showing her daughter's state of mind before departure. Cheerful, optimistic, looking forward to the voyage. Insurance investigators conducted their own inquiries. They found no evidence of fraud, no suspicious insurance policies, no hidden financial motives. The cargo was properly documented and insured. The ship herself was underinsured, making insurance fraud theories implausible. Private investigations followed. James Winchester, principal owner of the Mary Celeste, hired his own investigators. They interviewed shipbuilders, previous captains, crew members who had sailed on her before. They found a troubled history but no explanation for the abandonment. The investigation's greatest failure was their narrow focus. Convinced they were investigating a crime, authorities looked for criminals. When none appeared, they had no framework for understanding what had happened. Natural phenomena, equipment failure, mass psychology, these possibilities were barely considered. Years later, new investigations would be launched as new theories emerged. In 1884, attempting to solve the mystery through fiction, young Arthur Conan Doyle published Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement, a sensational tale of murder and conspiracy aboard the Mary Celeste. Though clearly labeled fiction, many took it as fact, muddying waters already murky with speculation. The investigations also suffered from the loss of crucial evidence. The Mary Celeste herself continued sailing after the inquiry, her new owners making modifications that destroyed potential clues. The ship's papers, taken by Captain Briggs and never recovered, might have contained vital information. The missing lifeboat, never found, could have told its own story. Perhaps most critically, the investigations failed because they occurred too late. By the time the Mary Celeste reached Gibraltar, she had been drifting for 10 days. Weather had erased subtle clues, water damage had destroyed potential evidence. The scene had been contaminated by the boarding party and subsequent investigators. Modern investigative techniques might have found answers. DNA analysis of the supposed bloodstains, metallurgical examination of the damaged compass, chemical analysis of the empty barrels, psychological profiling of the crew, all were beyond aid. The investigators did their best with available tools, but those tools were inadequate to the task. The official verdict was simply cause unknown. The court could determine that the crew had abandoned the ship but not why. It could establish that they had left in the ship's boat but not where they went. It could prove they never returned but not what prevented them. This official failure created a vacuum that speculation rushed to fill. Without authoritative answers, any theory became possible. The Mary Celeste passed from legal mystery to legend, from maritime record to myth. The failure of investigation ensured her immortality as an unsolved riddle. The Mary Celeste story didn't end with her famous abandonment. The ship herself sailed on for another 13 years, as if determined to add more chapters to her strange tale. Her subsequent history, while less mysterious, was no less tragic. After the Gibraltar proceedings, the Mary Celeste was returned to her owners and sold at a significant loss. Her reputation as a cursed ship made buyers wary. She passed through a succession of owners, each hoping to profit from the vessel they acquired cheaply. But the Mary Celeste seemed to carry her curse forward. Under various captains, she suffered continued misfortunes, cargo spoiled inexplicably, crew members deserted at unprecedented rates, profitable voyages turned to losses through circumstances that defied explanation. Ships that had sailed alongside her reported seeing strange lights aboard at night, though her crew saw nothing unusual. The end came in January 1885, 13 years after the famous abandonment. Under Captain Gilman Parker, the Mary Celeste was wrecked on the Ruchala Reef near Haiti. The circumstances were suspicious. The reef was well charted and the weather clear. Insurance investigators suspected deliberate wrecking, and Parker was arrested for fraud. The trial revealed that Parker had overinsured worthless cargo and likely drove the ship onto the reef intentionally. But before the verdict could be rendered, Parker died suddenly. Some said suspiciously. His first mate died 3 months later. Within 8 years, all the major figures in the fraud had died, most under unusual circumstances. The Mary Celeste, it seemed, took her revenge on those who had murdered her. But it was the mystery of 1872, not her final wreck, that ensured the Mary Celeste's immortality. The abandoned ship became a cultural phenomenon, inspiring countless books, articles, films, and investigations. Each generation rediscovered the mystery and proposed new solutions. Arthur Conan Doyle's 1884 short story J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement transformed the mystery into sensation. Though fictional, Doyle's tale of murder and racial revenge was so compelling that many accepted it as fact. He changed the ship's name to Mary Celeste, a misspelling that persists to this day. His story established the template for Mary Celeste fiction. Take the known facts and add whatever drama the author desired. Chambers' Journal published the true story in 1904, claiming the crew had been eaten by sharks after abandoning ship. No evidence supported this theory, but it satisfied readers' appetite for definitive answers. The article's author later admitted he had invented the entire explanation. In 1913, the Strand magazine offered a solution involving a swimming race that went tragically wrong. According to this theory, the crew had gone swimming on a calm day, but currents had swept them away from the becalmed ship. Creative, but it ignored the December Atlantic's freezing temperatures and the evidence of recent bad weather. The 1920s brought scientific explanation. Bermuda Triangle enthusiasts claimed the Mary Celeste as an early victim of mysterious forces in that region. Ignoring that she was found nowhere near Bermuda, UFO theorists suggested alien abduction, anachronistically applying modern mythology to a 19th century mystery. Hollywood discovered the Mary Celeste in 1935, with The Mystery of the Mary Celeste. Using Doyle's misspelling, Bela Lugosi starred as a murderous sailor in a plot bearing no resemblance to known fact. The film established another tradition, using the ship's name to tell whatever story the creators wished, regardless of history. World War II interrupted Mary Celeste speculation, but the 1950s brought renewed interest. A BBC radio play suggested ergot poisoning. A German researcher proposed Elmo's fire frightened the crew overboard. An American author claimed to have found the missing logbook. He hadn't. The most elaborate hoax came in 1929 when London's Evening Standard published articles by Lee Kay, claiming to be from a survivor named John Pemberton. Pemberton spun a tale of Captain Briggs going mad and murdering everyone until stopped by the heroic crew. The survivor had supposedly stayed quiet for decades out of respect for Briggs' family. When readers pointed out factual errors, crew names wrong, dates impossible, the newspaper quietly dropped the series. Modern investigations have been more serious but no more successful. In 2001, Documentarian Anne McGregor investigated the theory that alcohol vapors caused abandonment. She recreated the conditions aboard ship and proved that the type of alcohol carried couldn't create dangerous vapors under normal conditions. In 2006, the Smithsonian Channel's The True Story of the Mary Celeste used modern maritime forensics to examine the case. Their conclusion: a faulty chronometer led to navigation errors. The crew abandoned ship believing they were near shore and died in the lifeboat. Was plausible but unprovable. The Mary Celeste has become more than a maritime mystery. She's a mirror reflecting each era's preoccupation. The Victorians saw crime and conspiracy. The early 20th century saw natural disasters. The atomic age saw supernatural forces. The modern era sees system failures and human error. Each generation projects its fears onto those empty decks. Museums compete for Mary Celeste artifacts. The few confirmed pieces, a compass here, a logbook there, command high prices. Forgeries abound. Everyone wants to own a piece of the mystery, to hold something those doomed sailors touched. The families of the missing crew have their own legacy. Descendants still research, hoping to find answers. Arthur Briggs, the captain's nephew, spent decades collecting documents and testimonies. The Lorenzens family in Germany maintained correspondence with other crew families until World War. They never found answers, but they found community in shared loss. After examining evidence, theories, and investigations spanning over 150 years, we return to the fundamental question: what really happened to the Mary Celeste? The honest answer remains what it was in 1873. We don't know. But perhaps we can narrow the possibilities. We can dismiss the sensational theories. No pirates attacked the cargo and valuables remained. No mutiny occurred. There were no signs of violence. No sea monsters or aliens intervened. We need not invoke the fantastic when the mundane suffices. The crew wasn't poisoned by ergot or driven mad by contaminated food. They had been eating from the same stores for weeks without incident. What remains are more prosaic but plausible explanations. The evidence points to a sudden but orderly abandonment. The crew had time to launch the lifeboat and take navigation instruments. This suggests perceived danger rather than immediate catastrophe. The alcohol cargo provides the most likely key, not through explosion. The type of alcohol couldn't explode under those conditions, not through fumes. They would have dispersed quickly, but through fear. If the crew heard alarming noises from the hold, saw vapor they couldn't identify, or believed explosion was imminent, they might have abandoned ship temporarily. The key word is temporarily. The trailing rope suggests they intended to remain attached to the ship, waiting for danger to pass. But something went wrong. The rope broke or was cut. The weather worsened. The ship sailed away faster than they could row. Within hours, the Mary Celeste and her lifeboat were separated beyond recovery. Picture the scene: 10 people in a small boat watching their ship disappear into the distance. They have minimal supplies, basic navigation tools, and are 600 miles from land. The December Atlantic is cold and unforgiving. Their oars are no match for wind and current. They last perhaps days, perhaps only hours. The sea claims them as it has claimed so many others, leaving no trace. This theory explains the orderly abandonment, the missing lifeboat, the trailing rope, and the lack of return. It requires no villains, no supernatural intervention, no mass madness, just a tragic miscalculation by experienced sailors who thought they were taking a reasonable precaution. But this is just one possibility. The truth died with those 10 people in the winter Atlantic. Every theory has flaws. Every explanation raises new questions. The Mary Celeste keeps her secrets, because the only witnesses are gone. Perhaps that's why the mystery endures. In our age of surveillance cameras and GPS tracking, when every moment is documented and every movement tracked, the Mary Celeste represents the unknowable. She reminds us that despite our technology and knowledge, the sea still holds mysteries. Ships still disappear. People still vanish. Not everything can be explained. The Mary Celeste sails on in our imagination, her decks forever empty, her story forever unfinished. She has become myth, but she was real. 10 people, men, women, and a child disappeared from her deck. They had families who mourned, friends who wondered, lives that mattered. Behind the mystery lies human tragedy. What really happened? We can speculate, theorize, investigate, but we cannot know. The Atlantic keeps its secret. The Mary Celeste remains what she became that December day in 1872, a mystery, a warning, a reminder of the sea's ultimate indifference to human life and understanding. In the end, perhaps the mystery itself is the answer. Some things are not meant to be known. Some stories have no end. Some ships sail on forever, empty and enigmatic, reminding us that for all our certainty and civilization, we remain small figures on a vast and unknowable ocean. The Mary Celeste was found abandoned on December 5th. Everything else is speculation. That single fact, stark and incontrovertible, is all we truly know. The rest is silence, as deep and impenetrable as the ocean that swallowed her crew and kept their fate forever hidden. So, what do you think happened to the Mary Celeste? After examining all the evidence, considering every theory, and walking through 150 years of investigation, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe the alcohol vapor theory, that fear of explosion drove them to temporarily abandon ship, only to be separated forever by weather and currents? Or do you see evidence pointing elsewhere? Perhaps you've noticed details I've missed, connections I haven't made. Some of you might have family stories about the sea, tales of strange occurrences that make the Mary Celeste seem less impossible. Others might have expertise in maritime history, weather patterns, or human psychology that sheds new light on old evidence. Leave your theories in the comments below, but please ground them in the evidence we've discussed. What facts support your conclusion? What details are most significant to you? The best mysteries inspire not wild speculation but careful thought. If you found this deep dive into maritime history intriguing, please like and subscribe. I cover historical mysteries, examining evidence with the cold eye of investigation, rather than the heated imagination of sensation. Next week we'll explore another enigma that has puzzled investigators for decades. Share this video with anyone fascinated by unsolved mysteries or maritime history. The Mary Celeste story has endured for over a century and a half, because it speaks to something fundamental: our need to understand, and our frustration when understanding fails. And remember, somewhere beneath the Atlantic waves lies a small lifeboat with answers to our question. Until the sea gives up its dead, the mystery of the Mary Celeste endures. The ghost ship sails on, forever empty, forever mysterious, forever reminding us that not all questions have answers. What really happened on that December day? The truth is out there, beneath the waves, beyond our reach. But that doesn't stop us from wondering, investigating, and imagining. Because in the end, the mystery of the Mary Celeste is our mystery too. A reminder that in this age of answers, some questions endure. Until next time, keep questioning, keep investigating, and remember, the sea never gives up all its secrets.